Good afternoon, Carl. I've been just trying to reach you at 8 o'clock, but can't get through. I'll call you again after this video. Anyway, we now move on to the second portion of Chapter 4, the tale of Kotick, the White Seal. Where we left Kotick, he was following the hunters to the killing grounds. The distance to the killing grounds was only half a mile, but it took an hour to cover because if the seals went too fast, Kotick knew they would get heated and then their fur would come off in patches. So they went on very slowly, past Sea Lion Necks, past Webster House, till they came to the salt house just beyond the sight of the seals on the beach. Kotick followed, panting and wondering. He thought that he was perhaps at World's End, but the roar of the seal nurseries behind them sounded as loud as the roar of a train in a tunnel. Then Carrick sat down on the moss and pulled out a heavy pewter watch to let the drove cool off for 30 minutes, and Kotick could hear the fog dew dripping off the brim of his cap. Then 10 or 12 men, each with an iron-bounded club 3 or 4 feet long, came up, and Carrick pointed out 1 or 2 of the drove that were bitten by their companions or too hot, and the men kicked those aside with their heavy boots made of skin of a walrus throats. And then Carrick said, "Let go," and the men clubbed the seals in the head as fast as they could. That was enough for Kotick. He turned and galloped. A seal can gallop very swiftly for a short time, back to the sea, his little new moustache bristling with horror. At Sea Lion's Neck, where the great sea lions sit on the edge of the surf, he flung himself, flipper overhead, into the cool water and rocked there, gasping miserably. "What's there?" said a sea lion gruffly, for sea lions keep to themselves. "Scoochie ni, ochen scoochni, I'm lonesome, very lonesome," said Kotick. "They're killing all the holoshiki on the beaches." The sea lion turned his head and shot. "Nonsense," he said. "Your friends are making much noise as ever. You ever seen old Carrick polishing off a drove? He's done that for 30 years. It's horrible," said Kotick, backing water as a wave went over him and steadying himself with a screw stroke of his flippers that brought him all standing within 3 inches of the jagged edge of rock. "Well done for yearling," said the sea lion, who could appreciate good swimming. "I suppose it's rather awful from your way of looking at it. But if you seals will come here year after year, then of course men will get to know of it, and unless you can find an island where no men ever come, you will always be driven." "Is there any such island? I have followed the Pultus, which is to say the halibut, for 20 years, and I can't say I've found it yet. But look here, you seem to have a fondness for talking to your betters. Suppose you go to Walrus and talk to Seavich. He might know something. Don't flounce off like that. It's a 6-mile swim, and if I were you, I should haul out and take a nap first, little one." Kotick thought it good advice, and he swam around to his own beach, hauled out, and slept for half an hour, twitching all over as seals will. Then he headed straight for Walrus Island, a little low sheet of rocky island almost due northeast from Nova Toshna. All ledges and rock and gull's nest where the walrus herded by themselves. He landed close to old Seavich, the big, ugly, bloated, pimpled, fat-necked, long-tusked walrus of the North Pacific who has no manners except when he's asleep, as he was then, with his hind flippers half in and half out of the surf. "Wake up!" barked Kotick, for the gulls were making a great noise. "Ha! Humph! Humph!" "What's that?" said Seavich, and he struck the next walrus a blow with his tusk and woke him up, and the next struck the next, and so on till they all awake and staring every direction but the right one. "Hi, it's me," said Kotick, bobbing in the surf and looking like a little white slug. "Well, may I be skinned?" said Seavich, and they all looked at Kotick as you can fancy a club full of drowsy old gentlemen who would look at a little boy. Kotick did not care to hear any more about the skinning then. He had just seen enough of it. So he called out, "Is there any place for seals to go where men don't ever come?" "Go and find out," said Seavich, shutting his eyes. "Run away. We're busy here." Kotick made his dolphin jump in the air and shouted as loud as he could, "Clam eater! Clam eater!" He knew Seavich never caught a fish in his life, but always rooted for clams and seaweeds, though he pretended to be a very terrible person. Naturally, the chickies and gooverooskies and the epacas, the burgomaster gulls and the kittiwakes and the puffins, who were always looking for a chance to be rude, took up the cry, and so, the mission told me, for nearly 5 minutes you could not heard a gunfire on Walrus Island. All the population was yelling and screaming, "Clam eater, starik," which is to say, "old man, Carl," while Seavich was rolled from one side to another, grunting and coughing. "Now will you tell?" said Kotick, all out of breath. "Go and ask Sea Cow," said Seavich. "If he is living still, he'll be able to tell you." "How shall I know Sea Cow when I meet him?" said Kotick, sheering off. "He is the only thing in the sea uglier than Seavich," screamed a burgomaster gull, wheeling under Seavich's nose. "Uglier and with worse manners. Starik!" Kotick swam back to Novas Toshna. leaving the gulls to scream. There he found that no one sympathized with him in his little attempt to discover a quiet place for the seals. They told him that men had always driven the holoshiki. He was part of a day's work, and if he didn't like to see ugly things, he should not have gone to the killing grounds. But none of the other seals had seen the killing, and it made a difference between him and his friends. Besides, Kotick was a white seal. What you must do, said old Sea Cat after he'd heard his son's adventures, is to grow up and be a big seal like your father, and have a nursery on the beach, and then they will leave you alone. In the 5 years you'll be able to fight for yourself. Even gentle Matka, his mother said, you never able to stop the killing. Go and play in the sea, Kotick. And Kotick went off and danced the fire dance with a very heavy heart. That autumn he left the beach as soon as he could and set off alone because of a notion in his bullet head. He was going to find sea cow, if there was such a person in the sea, and he was going to find a quiet island with good firm beaches for seals to live on, where men could not get at them. So he explored and explored myself in the north to the South Pacific, swimming as much as 300 miles in a day and a night. He met with more adventures than can be told, and naturally escaped being caught by the basking shark, and the spotted shark, and the hammerhead. And he met all the untrustworthy ruffins that loaf up and down the seas, and the heavy polite fish, and the scarlet-spotted scallops that are moored in one place for hundreds of years, and grow very proud of it. But he never met the sea cow, and he never found an island that he could fancy. If the beach was good and hard, with a slope behind it for seals to play on, there was always the smoke of a whale on the horizon, boiling down blubber, and Kotick knew what that meant. Or else he could see the seals had once visited the island being killed off, and Kotick knew that when men had come, they would come again. He picked up an old stump-toothed albatross who told him the Kerguelen Island was the very place for peace and quiet, and when Kotick went down there, he was all but smashed to pieces against some wicked black cliffs in a heavy sleet storm with lightning and thunder. Yet as he pulled out against the gale, he could see that even there had once been a seal nursery, and was so in all the islands that visited him. Limmersham gave a long list of them, for he said Kotick spent 5 seasons exploring, with 4 months' rest each year at Novas Toshna, when the holoshiki used to make fun of him and his imaginary islands. He went to the Galapagos, a horrid dry place in the equator, and was nearly baked to death. He went to George Islands, the Orkneys, Emerald Island, Little Nightingale Island, Gow's Island, Bouvet's Island, the Crossets, and even to a little speck of an island south of the Cape of Good Hope. But everywhere the people of the sea told him the same things. Seals had come once to those islands, but men had killed them all off. Even when he swam thousands of miles out to the Pacific and got to a place called Cape Corrientes, that was when he was coming back from Gow's Island, he found a few hundred mangy seals in a rock, and they told him men came there too. That nearly broke his heart, and he headed round the Horn back to his own beaches on his weary way north, hauled out an island full of green trees, and he found an old seal who was dying. Kotick caught fish for him, and he told him all his sorrows. Now, said Kotick, I'm going back to Novas Toshna, and if I am driven to the killing pens with the holoshiki, I shall not care. The old seal said, try once more. I am the last of the lost rookery of Masafuera, and in those days when men killed us by the 100,000, there was a story on the beaches is that someday a white seal would come out of the north and lead the seal people to a quiet place. I am old, and I shall never live to see that day, but others will. Try once more. And Kotick curled up his moustache, it was a beauty, and said, I am the only white seal that has ever been born on the beaches, and I am the only seal, black or white, who's ever thought of looking for new islands. This cheered him immensely, and when he came back to Nova Toshna that summer, Matka, his mother, begged him to marry and settle down, for he was no longer a holoshik, but a full-grown sea cat, with a curly white mane on his shoulders and a heavy, big, and fierce as his father. Give me another season, he said. Remember, mother, it is always the 7th wave that goes furthest up the beach. Curious enough, there was another seal who thought that she would put off marrying to next year, and Kotick danced the fire dance with her all down Lucanon Beach that night, and before he set off on his last exploration. This time he went westwards, because he had fallen on the trail of a great shoal of halibut, and needed at least 100 pounds of fish a day to keep him in good condition. He chased them till he was tired, and then he curled himself up and went to sleep on the hollow of the grounds, the swell that set into Cop Island. He knew that the coast perfectly well, so about midnight, when he felt himself gently bumped on a weed bed, said, the tide is running strong tonight, and turning over under water, opened his eyes slowly and stretched. Then he jumped like a cat, for he saw huge things nosing about in the shore water and browsing on the heavy fringes of weeds. By the great combers of Magellan, he said beneath his moustache, who in the deep sea are these people? They were no walrus, sea lion, seal, bear, whale, shark, fish, squid, or scallop that Kotick had ever seen before. They were between 20 and 30 feet long, and they had no hind flippers, but a shovel-like tail that looked like it had been whittled out of wet leather. Their heads were the most foolish-looking things you ever saw, and they balanced on the ends of their tails in deep water when they weren't grazing, bowing solemnly to each other and waving their front flippers as a fat man waves his arm. They were like no walrus, sea lion, seal, bear, whale, shark, squid. I've been through that. Ahem, said Kotick. Good sport, gentlemen? The big things answered by bowing and waving their flippers like the frog footmen. When they began feeding again, Kotick saw their upper lip was split into two pieces that they could twitch apart about a foot and bring together again with a whole bushel of seaweed beneath the splits. They tucked the stuff into their mouths and chomped soundly. Messy style of feeding that, said Kotick. They bowed again, and Kotick began to lose his temper. Very good, he said. If you do happen to have an extra joint in your front flippers, you needn't show off so. I see you bow gracefully, but I should like to know your names. The split lips moved and twitched, and the glassy green eyes stared, but they did not speak. Well, said Kotick, you are the only people I've ever met uglier than Seevich, and with worse manners. And then he remembered in a flash what the burgomaster girl had screamed to him when he was a little yearling at Walrus Island, and he tumbled backward in the water, for he knew he had found the sea cow at last. The sea cows went on schlooping and grazing and chomping in the weed, and Kotick asked them questions in every language he had picked up in his travels. And the sea people talk in nearly as many languages as human beings. But the sea cows did not answer, because sea cows cannot talk. He has only 6 bones in his neck where he ought to have 7, and they say under the sea that this prevents him speaking even to his companions. But, as you know, his next joint in his foreflipper, and by waving up and down and about he makes what answers to a sort of clumsy telegraphic code. By daylight, Kotick's mane was standing on end and his temper gone where the dead crabs go. Then the sea cow began to travel northwards very slowly to hold to absurd bowing councils from time to time, and Kotick followed, saying to himself, people who are such idiots as these should have been killed long ago if they hadn't found some safe island. What is good enough for the sea cow is good enough for the sea catch. All the same, I wish they'd hurry. It was weary work for Kotick. Herd went never more than 40 or 50 miles a day, and they stopped to feed at night and kept close to the shore all the time, while Kotick swam around them and over them and under them, but he could not get them to hurry up 1/2 mile. As they went further north, they held a bowing council every few hours, and Kotick nearly bit off his moustache with impatience till he saw that they were following up a warm current of river, and then he respected them more. One night they sank through the shiny water, sank like stones, and for the first time since he had known them, began to swim quickly. Kotick followed, and the pace astonished him, for he never dreamed that the sea cow was anything of a swimmer. They headed for a cliff by a shore, a cliff that ran down into deep water and plunged into a dark hole at the foot of it, 20 fathoms under the sea. It was a long, long swim, and Kotick badly wanted fresh air before he was out of the dark tunnel they led him through. My wig, he said when he rose, gasping and puffing at open water. It was a long dive, but it was worth it. The sea cows had separated and browsing lazily along the edge of the finest beaches that Kotick had ever seen. These were long stretches of smooth-worn rock running for miles, exactly fitted to make seal nurseries, and there were playgrounds of hard sand sloping in between them, and there were rollers for the seals to dance in, and long grass to roll in, and sand dunes to climb up and down, and, best of all, Kotick knew by the feel of the water, which never deceives a true sea catch, no man had ever come there. First thing he did was to assure himself the fishing was good, and then he swam all along the beaches and counted up the delightful low, sandy islands half hidden in the beautiful rolling fog. Afterwards, to the northward, out to sea, ran a line of bars and shoals and rocks that would never let a ship come within 6 miles of the beach, and between the islands and the mainland was a stretch of deep water that ran up the perpendicular cliffs, and somewhere below the cliffs was the mouth of the tunnel. It's Novastoshnah all over again, but 10 times better, said Kotick. Sea cow must be wiser than I thought. Men can't calm down the cliffs, and even if there were any men, and the shoals to seaward would knock a ship to splinters. If any place in the sea is safe, this is it. He began to think of the sea he had left behind him, but though he was in a hurry to go back to Novastoshnah, he thoroughly explored the new country, so that he would be able to answer all questions. Then he died and made sure of the mouth of the tunnel, and raced through to the southward. No one but a sea cow or a seal would have dreamed of being such a place, and when we look back at the cliffs, even Kotick could hardly believe that he'd been under them. He was 6 days going home, though he was not swimming slowly, and we hauled out just above Sea Lion's neck. The first person he met was the seal who had been waiting for him, and she saw by the look in his eyes that he had found his island at last. Until next time, Carl, when we find out how the story of Kotick the White Seal ends. Love you to pieces.